cities that rise are part, in fact, of the Roman camp um, originally. So this concept of literally bringing your own um, imperial spirit to modify the local disorder and making it one with Rome is that coming back to the perfect unity, to the divine order that Rome as a mission, as a gospel, had committed herself in achieving. Um, and it's obvious, however, that Roman camps were also, um, built according to the circumstances, according to the terrain, right? They guaranteed a fair amount of safety during night breaks and also in the case of prolonged settlements, for that matter, so they were widened eventually over time. Some of them were permanent, the castra stativa, famously enough, and the they were divided into tents, as we've seen in other videos, called the contubernia, that were essentially the sort of team, like the squad that lived together and shared the same tent. They were the same people who fought in a row, apparently, in the unit, in the century, right? So this all reflected kind of a shared lifestyle of camaraderie, of reliance, and of self-sufficiency, because much of this was also, of course, connected with the still relatively fresh memory that, say, these powers were beckoned in the world, that there had been a sort of culture settlement of invasion, of marching, of going far away. It was part of the still shortly settled, after all, in a broader historical perspective, people's say belief kind of lifestyle. The men always erected their pavilion in the same spot within the camp, according to the needs. Familiarity with the layout of it and the arrangement of the commander's stance favored this orderly reaction in the event of a night attack. But just they had a broader functionality for the building and also the living of the camp at the same time. The auxilia were on the external perimeter, so everything was still conceived in the idea that Rome is the center of the world and then all the rest gravitates around her. The protection of the camp was entrusted to a simple trench surmounted by a low embankment built with excavated material. The obstacle was garnished by a palisade raised with the posts supplied to the troops, a defense sufficient to prevent surprise attacks. The Romans brought with them the so-called pila muralia, that were these sort of poles that were fixed in the terrain and could use as, in fact, be used as a sort of palisade, but were like essentially mounted up like cheval de frise at some point. They were quite versatile, and every soldier brought them as well. So the legionnaire brought on his shoulders like up to even 50 kilos of equipment, and this was part of the training, right? That was also standardized, was cadenced, was a continuous test for the legionary that increased properly the exposure to fatigue, so that when battle arrived, the worst had already been experienced, and this man knew exactly what to do. This, as you will see, this was done also in the training. The training was extenuating, so that in battle everything would seem easier. You would just automatically perform those movements that you had been trained for. The Romans had several words to define the army. They called it agmen when it was on the march, exercitus if they wanted to indicate an orderly and disciplined army, Acies if they refer to the troops lined up for battle. Always remember this, like you can pick any kind of Latin vocabulary and looking at the etymologies, the semantics of it, so you can understand what they actually meant. But always remember, if you find Agmen, we're talking about a legion on the march, right? An army on the march of some sort. So the order was also the one used during the march, not while it was deployed later, right? The exercitus, or exercitus, actually means literally the one that has been exercised, right? It became the standard Latin term for army, right? And so something pretty well arrayed in some sort. The Acies was the properly the battle array, right? How the troops were lined up. So when the army was stopped in front of the enemy in the combat, in the battle formation, right? Acies then came to define even the single battle lines, because Acies meant initially the single battle line, then that eventually, as we've seen, was multiplied in various battle lines. So the Acies there refer to the both the, at least in Middle Latin, maybe I'm biased by as a medievalist, like Acies is the single battle line, maybe or even of the tree. But originally Latin meant the entire formation. Then the fact it was triplex meant that there were 3 battle lines, and a formation that moved in tight order was called agmen justum or agmen pilatum. That is to say, the justum means literally just, so the idea that the close order is the right one for battle, because this was heavy infantry and that's how they had to be deployed. So ready for battle, right? So an agmen that could be more easily redeployed for the battle for maybe in Acies, let's say. Agmen pilatum stands here for in columns, too, because in part, let's say the way the Roman army was marching, even though we don't have a clear evidence for this, but was surely designed for being redeployed successfully. So the fact that it was put in column in a certain order, and I made some drawings about this, and again there is no evidence in the Roman sources, but it's kind of obvious, like would have a let's say an evident functionality for deploying, for passing from column to line the moment of the battle. While if the army proceeded without too many precautions, the formation was called agmen incautum, so in cautious order. Thus, like, it means you're not, these are very generic terms. It may mean that literally the order of the formation is not adequate in some way for combat. It may mean that you're not expecting to meet an enemy, so lots of precautions are not there. Maybe you're not even properly armed, but it also refers to literally the disposition of the troops within. Like that's the semantic group of that it can refer to in meaning. The agmen primum meant the vanguard, so the first agmen. So as you understand here, literally the Romans thought like the agmen and the acies can be the same thing. They're defined by the literally that whether they are in march or in line, right? So that's how attentive the Latin language was to the actual, battle readiness conceptually. The agmen medium, so medium, would be the center of the formation. The extremum or novum, so the extreme or new, was the rear guard instead, according to a distinction that was already present in the Republican age. I made a video about Roman arrays and marching formations, by the way, so you can check that out exactly for the Republican era. But I will make it for other times as well. Now, the agmen quadratum was called instead the army advancing in square, because it literally means squared formation of march. So the concept was that the square could mean literally you have a baggage in the center. So it's a kind of array that was used to, especially imagine marching in enemy territory, you fear attacks at your supplies, etc. So they defended them just by not exposing them from the side. Naturally, this meant that they had to find the right terrain to have such a wide formation as well. So you understand it's also a generic concept, but it's present. And agmen quadratum is also sometimes at least synonymous with acies triplex. Right, so an army that marches already lined up to face combat, ordered in the, say, older usual 3 Roman lines, which we find say mostly in the Manipular Legion, but was present in imperial times. We have some formations on triple line also later. Very often we don't know whether, like mostly were the cohorts deployed like that, but we have very few details about the whole arrays, right? The concept is just you have lines of battle that, again, not even the legionary organic was always the same. We like to count it and so on, but numerically, etc. But every legion varied in number. It was not a legion, it was perfectly equal to another. The organic could fluctuate, even more so during the campaign, as you understand, but also in kind of normal times that depended on the local administration, how the troops also were needed in different numbers, etc. Always remember that legions operated also together with each other, with auxiliary forces, with other external help. So when we talk about Roman warfare, we mostly think of, say, let's count the legions. But if you look at an average Roman army, it was also not very different from another one in the composite nature of the same. And we rarely make that point, right? We concentrate just on the legionary organic, and conceptually we cross out all the rest. But that would show you also how much the Romans were reliant on other forces and how much they cared also about their legions, because losing a legion, as you understand, was also a pretty problematic thing. And sometimes, for example, the siege of Masada is just, a dirty fort in the desert, but there was a very propagandistic show in a safe situation, say, look, the Romans, if they want, can employ a 5,500 man force, which was huge for those times, just in terms of costs of surplus, crop rates, etc., just to besiege those last Jewish rebels. And that showed what Rome was in their perspective. So the legion was, of course, throughout Roman history, appreciated in different ways. The civil wars legions were in theory kind of less important than the Augustan time ones, right? After it had been properly stabilized as permanent forces, become more, better supplied, less but more compact, better armed, and so on. In other times, the legion was different, and there were also different standards, different. Every unit, even the auxiliary ones, of course, had a religious meaning with them. But the Roman legion had to tower over all the others in power and prestige, and losing, as you know, the standards was the worst, even for the smallest units. You can imagine for the eagle, and so on. But coming back to the augment quadratum, it's important to stress that the possibility could be an Agios triplex in the process is due to the fact that it was kind of a deeper formation than the usual, as you understand. This largely depended on the contingencies of the terrain, or how you could dispose these forces, the tactical needs, whatever. But augment quadratum, for this reason, is also confused with the idea that there was a sort of checkerboard formation that kind of also, as you understand, for a simple but, you know, historically unrelated visual analogy, thought be literally the chessboard one. This particular array is not really witnessed, nor we have any evidence to say whether it was the standard one. This is a long debate, but there is no actual way to confirm it in either way. Lots of people will tell you that, but the checkerboard formation was able to essentially provide with this kind of punching type of tactics for which the battle lines alternated in the gaps and all this stuff. There's not a single evidence of this, simply because nobody has the palest idea of how much space existed between the Roman units, whether it be a century, maniple, whatever. And this is interesting because, of course, many people with wargamistic prejudices must feel that this was a thing, but especially they don't understand that armies do not come all in, especially in the millennia of Roman history, all in the same guise, nor they are commanded, organized, trained, equipped, fielded, or fighting in the same way. Nobody does. So the mere fact that somebody thinks that there was something standardly achieved in this regard, especially as far as tactics is concerned, and considering the flexibility of the Roman army, means again falling in the usual deterministic, positivistic stereotype that the Romans were strong because they used a checkerboard formation as opposed to a single line. Nobody says that. There is no evidence, and this is universally notorious for anyone who knows literally anything about the thing, because there is no evidence. The first thing you do as a historian is saying, okay, where's the evidence notoriously, universally, on these texts that have been studied from 2 millennia? There is not a single reference to it, and everybody knows it. So how do you cope with that, right? How do you cope with the fact that you are essentially forcing an interpretation that is not supported in either way by anything? You're just saying, but this was perhaps more effective. It's just an hypothesis. There can be hypotheses that are better than others. In any case, in my experience, I can tell you this, that the idea of having a checkerboard formation just per se, leaving aside the fact that we have still no idea of how alternated, and literally there is no need to have a checkerboard formation, the space between units to change battle lines, to alternate battle lines in combat. But of course there is a space between units, which also, even if it was large, literally is not exploitable by the enemy. This is true, and people keep confusing the two concepts continuously, like they confuse the collapse of a section of the line with the equivalence of a gap between units. They have serious problems with that. But secondly, even if when there is a space, literally, it's just can be of some, again, distance, but generally speaking, battle lines are continuous in warfare. You don't really find the the need of spacing dramatically units for some internal kind of basketball field reason where units just jump around to make complex tactical interaction. It doesn't really work like that, but everything was directed again to simplicity to a degree that would largely surprise us, together with lots of other aspects, such as the fact that probably even in terms of equipment, colors, whatever, the Romans weren't at all all alike, and armies were much more, let's leave aside arms and armor styles and so on, but properly every army had its own kind of uniqueness in a way. Surely they looked similar, as a minimal of uniformity exists, but it doesn't mean literally that you can apply that to any single thing an army is, and pretending that that goes on for hundreds of years without difference. So this video is just an incredibly contained reflection on these aspects, and we will address them individually in a dedicated video per each. That will take hundreds or thousands of videos, but we will make them because we must show how it is. Reason for which today, however, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.